The information that I'm going to give you today is correct to the best of my understanding, but my understanding might not be the best, so if any of you understand it better than I do, feel free to correct me. Can't get my head straight. Which way does it go? Trying to sit up straight here. Uh, there. How's that? I think I'm all crooked here. I need to move. Um, do you ever notice Brian Williams was crooked? I don't know if I said that before, but is everything Glenn Beck was talking about everything on his face is crooked. I had noticed that his nose is like really crooked, but he's crooked everywhere. You check out his face, he's pretty crooked. And I quit feeling quite so bad about my mess with my teeth because I've been noticing how many people have problems with their teeth that are on television in front of millions of people. So having said that, get back to the genetically modified organism. I knew that there was uh, I knew that there was what am I trying to say? I knew that there was an outcome pending where the genetically modified sugar beets were concerned that they hadn't been given the green light up until recently. I think it was July the 24th, 2012, that they finally gave Monsanto, I guess it is, the green light to produce a Roundup to grow. They've already produced it, but to grow a Roundup ready sugar beet. Now, to those of us who are not farmers, that might not make a lot of sense, but Roundup, if I understand this correctly, you can buy it to use in home applications, I think, is an herbicide. And the reason that the crops in the field look so beautiful and wonderful and weed-free is because, if I understand it correctly, they go through and spray an herbicide, which kills all the living weeds and anything else that might have cropped up. If there were some stray seeds from the whatever was planted there the year before, sometimes a corn seed will fall in harvest and a little corn plant will pop up. Well, it takes care of all that, so the only thing you have in the field is what you want in the field. So I guess it's an advantage to be able to create plants that the herbicide will not kill. If I understand this correctly, I've discussed it with a couple of people and read about it a little bit. If anybody needs to correct me, feel free. So it's to their advantage to be able to have a sugar beet growing in the field that will tolerate, or whatever plant it is, genetically modified. They said that 95% of the sugar beets anyways are genetically modified organisms, but these Roundup Ready have not been approved yet, if I understand it correctly. So what they're trying to do is to be able to plant sugar beets or other things that will tolerate an herbicide such as Roundup. Roundup is the trade name for the herbicide, if I understand it correctly. So from what I understood, July 24th, I think was the date that they finally gave it the green light to produce genetically modified sugar beets in the field that are Roundup tolerant. Apparently, where the controversy comes in is that these traits that these plants have are carried in the pollen on the wind and they get into other crops. And then that passes that characteristic on to these other crops that the person who planted those crops probably does not want their crops to have those characteristics carried on the winds in the pollen. And apparently it can travel quite some distance from what I was reading. Um, okay, bear with me for a minute. I'm trying to get my head caught up. One of the things they really don't want to have happen is to create what they call super weeds, because the weeds are controlled by the herbicides, but if the weeds develop the characteristic of being herbicide resistant, it's a lot like antibiotics with people. We've run into all kinds of problems with that. Um, then you can have a herbicide resistant weed, which they then term a super weed. It's kind of like the super bugs or the super bacteria that can be they can become resistant to antibiotics. So there's all kinds of illnesses out there that are really hard to deal with because they're antibiotic resistant, because they've had a chance to meet the antibiotic and say, hi, how are you? And, get to know the antibiotic, and then the antibiotic figures out a way to work its way around. I'm sorry, I'm getting it all screwed up. Forgive that whole analogy, but the bacteria become resistant to the antibiotic the same way, or a similar fashion, that these weeds could become resistant to herbicides, and then you have super weeds that you can't kill with herbicides. Does that make sense? When we were young, 40 years ago, our church used to contract out our labor. No, that's not true. They did used to contract out our labor for things such as inventories in stores, but this was not. This was property that the church actually owned. We had sugar beets on church property planted by the church for humanitarian aid, and the sugar beets were in rows a mile long. So we drove to where our farm was, and we had hose, or sometimes we just pull them out with our bare hands, but the weeds were like, nigh on as tall as you were, half as tall as you were, and the stalk on some of those weeds was yay big around, an inch and a half around, across, whatever you call that. And so we would just go from one end of the beet field to the other, pulling out these weeds, and apparently they still pay teenagers to do that. I shouldn't say teenagers, but the teenagers do it. People still pay people to manually remove the weeds out of sugar beet fields. So I figured that it must make quite a difference, in the tonnage of sugar beets, the tonnage of yield for the sugar beet fields, in order for them to have the money to pay people to go through and do that. 7 minutes. Sorry, people. I'm really sorry. But the other thing that was interesting to me is that the sugar beet harvest, oh, my throat is dry, I'm sorry, it's ahead of schedule. Sorry. It's ahead of schedule by about 6 weeks, and we can't understand why, unless maybe the supply ran low, because if I understood what I read a while back, we only have a 15-day overlap from one crop to the next. Only, if I understood it correctly, there's only a 15-day supply overlap from crop to crop. So perhaps we were a little too snug on the calendar there. I don't know. I'm going to try to find out. And perhaps this harvest needed to get underway quicker, but the sugar beets increased in their percentage of sugar that you can get out of each beet, according to how much cool weather they've been exposed to. And we haven't even had cool nights. We usually, it's like used to be right around October 1st that they began to harvest the sugar beets. This is more than you ever wanted to know about sugar beets. Some of it you learn without trying, trust me. Let's see. So it's very curious to me because they started earlier than usual. I'm going to say in the area, well, we weren't due to start sugar beet harvest for another 3+ weeks, and they've been harvesting already for 3 weeks, give or take. So if you're looking at 6 or 7 weeks early, that's kind of a strange thing to me. But I'm sure it's all over my head. It's probably stuff I don't understand and I'm not informed about. So that was more than you wanted to know about genetically modified organisms, specifically sugar beets. From what I understand, 50% of the sugar in this country is produced from beets, and obviously the remainder is probably produced from sugarcane. I'm going to learn more, and if I do, I'll pass it on. And anything that you can add to that, please feel free to put in the comment section below. What I guess I was trying to get at, sort of, is if the stuff they planted last year was not GMO, and they're harvesting it now, You could buy it. You could get your sugar from wherever you want to, but you could buy it and be reasonably certain that if it was a company in the United States, that it was not a GMO that you were purchasing. If somebody knows more than that, correct me. God bless your efforts to prepare. Make a list, check it twice, so you can eat more than just beans and just rice. And most of us consume the majority of our sugar in products that are already prepared for us, such as the what's the name of that place, Tim Horton donuts that I bought this afternoon. Um, and so if the time comes that you need to produce your own baked goods and so forth, you really are going to want to have some sugar, unless you already don't eat it. You really going to. I'm not a sugar proponent. I am a sugar consumer. You're really going to want to have some sugar. So make a list, check it twice, so you can eat more than just beans and just rice. And add your comments below 11 minutes. God bless your efforts to prepare. Stop recording.